Peter Jennings, reporting tonight from London, the site of the Economic Summit.
Good evening. Mikhail Gorbachev has finally arrived here in London, and it's been a long time since any politician from any country has caused so much of a stir even before his plane landed. Tomorrow, Mr. Gorbachev will try to convince the 7 industrial democracies holding their summit meeting here, his country's adversaries for more than 40 years, that they are the ones who can save his nation from chaos. It is going to be a very tough sell, and we'll come back to the Soviet leaders' challenge in a while. Today here in London, the political leaders from the US and Canada, Western Europe and Japan have come up with the traditional public summit declaration on the other urgent political matters of the day. At the head of the agenda, as so often, the Middle East. Here's our White House correspondent, Britt Hume.
By the time the summit convened this morning, President Bush and Secretary of State Baker had shifted its spotlight to what they're calling a breakthrough in the Middle East. Syria's letter to President Bush saying it will take part in a peace conference with Israel. The G7's interest was reflected in U.S.-supported language added to the annual summit political declaration released today. As explained by the host British, the wording sounded carefully balanced.
One, the suspending of the Arab boycott of Israel by Arab states, and secondly, the Israeli policy of building settlements in the occupied territories. We believe that the suspension of both those things would certainly be an advance.
In fact, though, it was the part about the Israeli settlements that had been added, and the purpose seemed clear: to help Baker, who's headed back to the Middle East, get Israel to match Syria with flexibility of its own. On other issues, British Prime Minister Major got the 7 behind a UN register to track arms sales worldwide. There was also a demand, obtained with support from France's Mitterrand, that Iraq disclose and destroy its mass destruction weapons. The 7 also agreed that sanctions on Iraq stay until all UN resolutions are met. There was plenty of time today, though, for the informal bonhomie that's supposed to be a big part of these summits. President Bush, for example, seemed to find Dutch Prime Minister Lubbers, the current European Common Market chairman, an absolute card. And this evening, the summit leaders were received at Buckingham Palace, where they posed for a picture with the Queen. After dinner, the royal family, including the Prince and Princess together, took them out on the balcony. And there they witnessed a laser light show that looked as if Las Vegas had come to London. The music and marching, though, were strictly British. Britt Hume, ABC News, London.
One other note about the U.S. and Saddam Hussein. Senior Soviet officials here today predict that if the U.S. decides to attack Iraq again to get at its nuclear facilities, Hussein will survive. They also say that the Kurds, who the U.S. worked so hard to save from Hussein, oppose military action against him now because they think it would jeopardize their negotiations with Hussein for Kurdish autonomy. A controversy at home today may deflect President Bush's attention from economic summit matters for a while. Reluctantly, he agreed with the Senate Intelligence Committee to delay the confirmation hearings of Robert Gates, his nominee to be the new director of the CIA. It is a major disappointment for the president, and here's ABC's Jim Wooten. With the 7 industrial democracies, one of his aides said today it was the economic equivalent of tearing down the Berlin Wall. But even though the Soviets hint tonight that he's arrived with radical plans for ending the Communist Party's lock on the Soviet economy, the Soviets are also preparing to be disappointed. Here's our Moscow Bureau Chief, Jim Laurie.
In meetings all day tomorrow, Gorbachev will try using the force of his considerable personality to persuade Western leaders they must help the Soviet Union. He does not have yet the far-reaching reform plan the West wants to see. A 23-page letter from Gorbachev to his hosts still clings to the old concepts of a mixed economy, part socialist, part capitalist, limited privatization, continued collectivization. The reaction of Western leaders to this letter has been so negative, Gorbachev may be ready to outline further changes. His deputy prime minister even suggesting Western money could help force change.
If we are given $20 to $30 billion a year, then I would be willing to carry out a more radical program.
Gorbachev's top aides have been making the rounds, telling anyone who will listen that if things cannot be turned around, chaos looms. Atop Gorbachev's wish list is full membership in the International Monetary Fund, the big lending institution that could give Moscow money. But for now, the West will offer only limited IMF membership, giving only economic advice, no money. If Gorbachev wants more, he'll have to go home and persuade his people to adopt a true free market without old-style communist reservations. Jim Laurie, ABC News, London.
One thing that people sometimes forget, the Soviet Union is potentially a very, very rich nation. For one thing, it has vast oil reserves. And one of the Soviets' main requests here in London is for Western